Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The land was a scarred and desolate place, where the echoes of 1,000 battles lingered in the air like a haunting refrain. For as long as anyone could remember, the war had raged between humanity and the demon legion, a conflict so ancient that the origins had been lost to time, buried beneath layers of blood and ash. The skies were a perpetual gray, the sun barely breaking through the thick clouds of smoke that hovered above the battlefield, as if even the heavens were tired of witnessing the carnage below. Across the battlefield, the last remnants of humanity fought with a desperation born of centuries of struggle. The demons, grotesque and malevolent, poured forth from the abyss, their numbers seemingly endless. They were creatures of nightmare, with twisted forms and fiery eyes that burned with hatred. Each wave of the demon legion brought fresh horrors to the already tormented world, and yet, the humans fought on, driven by the faint hope that one day, the tide might turn. Among the soldiers, there was a young warrior named Daniel, who had known nothing but war his entire life. He had grown up hearing stories of the Golden Age, a time before the demons, when the world was a place of peace and prosperity. But to Daniel, those stories were nothing more than fairy tales, distant and unreachable. The world he knew was one of constant battle, where every day was a struggle to survive, and every night was filled with the screams of the dying. Daniel was a skilled fighter, his prowess on the battlefield unmatched by many of his peers. He wielded his sword with a precision that spoke of years of training and countless battles fought. Yet, despite his strength, there was a weariness in his eyes, a deep-seated exhaustion that came from the knowledge that the war had no end in sight. He fought because he had to, because there was no other choice, but in his heart, he longed for something more, something beyond the endless cycle of death and destruction. One day, during a routine patrol near the outskirts of the battlefield, Daniel stumbled upon something unexpected. The ground had been churned up by the fighting, revealing the ruins of an ancient city, long forgotten beneath the layers of earth and debris. Curiosity piqued, Daniel ventured into the ruins, his footsteps echoing off the crumbling stone walls. The city was a ghostly place, its once grand buildings now reduced to rubble, overtaken by the passage of time. As he explored the ruins, Daniel's attention was drawn to a structure that appeared to have withstood the ravages of time better than the others. It was a small, unassuming building, half buried in the earth, with a heavy stone door that looked as though it had not been opened in centuries. With some effort, Daniel managed to pry the door open, revealing a dark interior that smelled of dust and decay. Inside, the building was filled with shelves lined with ancient tomes, their pages yellowed with age. Daniel could hardly believe his eyes. He had heard of such libraries, places of knowledge and learning from the time before the war, but he had never expected to find one intact. Carefully, he began to sift through the books, his fingers brushing over the brittle pages. Most of the texts were written in a language he could not understand, their meanings lost to time, but one book in particular caught his eye. It was an old, leather-bound volume, larger than the others, with a symbol etched into the cover that Daniel did not recognize. The book seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow, as if it held a power that had been dormant for centuries, waiting to be awakened. Intrigued, Daniel opened the book, and as he did, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the torches that lined the walls. In the darkness, a voice spoke, low and resonant, echoing through the chamber. "Who dares to awaken the ancient knowledge?" it intoned, sending a shiver down Daniel's spine. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the very walls of the library were speaking to him. "I am Daniel, a warrior of the last human outpost," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "I seek a way to end this war, to bring peace to our world." There was a moment of silence, and then the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost contemplative. Peace, a noble goal, but one that comes with a heavy price. The knowledge you seek is here, within these pages, but be warned, what you find may not be what you expect. As the voice faded, the torches flared back to life, casting their flickering light over the ancient tome in Daniel's hands. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, spells and incantations that seemed to leap off the page as he read. The further he delved into the book, the more he realized the magnitude of what he had discovered. The book contained a spell, an ancient and powerful ritual capable of sealing the demon legion away forever, banishing them back to the infernal realm from which they had come. But the spell was not without its cost. Its success required a sacrifice of unimaginable proportions, something so valuable that it would leave the caster's soul shattered and broken. The spell called for the life force of not just one, but the combined essence of every warrior who had ever fought in the war, binding their spirits for eternity to hold the demons at bay. Daniel's heart sank as he read the final lines of the spell. The sacrifice was unthinkable: thousands, perhaps millions of souls, all bound together in eternal torment, their only purpose to keep the demons sealed away. And yet, what other choice did he have? The war had already claimed countless lives, and if it continued, it would only claim more. If this spell could truly end the conflict once and for all, was the price too high to pay? He spent the night in the library, wrestling with the decision. The weight of the choice pressed down on him, suffocating in its enormity. Every fiber of his being cried out against the idea of such a sacrifice, but he could not ignore the reality of the situation. The war had to end, and if he had the power to do it, how could he turn away? At dawn, Daniel made his decision. He would cast the spell, no matter the cost. He could not allow the war to continue, not when there was a chance, however small, to end it. The thought of the sacrifice still filled him with dread, but he steeled himself, knowing that it was the only way. He returned to his outpost with the ancient book, his face set in grim determination. The other warriors and scholars gathered around him as he explained what he had found, their reactions a mix of awe and horror. Some argued that the cost was too great, that they could not ask such a sacrifice of their fellow soldiers, but others, like Daniel, saw no other option. The war had dragged on for too long, and if this was their only chance to end it, they had to take it. Preparations began immediately. The ritual required a specific location, a place where the energies of the earth and sky converged, amplifying the power of the spell. After much deliberation, they chose Black Mountain, a towering peak that loomed over the battlefield like a silent sentinel. It was a place of ancient power, feared and revered by both humans and demons alike. If the spell was to succeed, it would have to be cast there. As they made their way to Black Mountain, the demon legion launched a massive assault, as if sensing the humans' desperation. The battle that followed was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The air was thick with the stench of death and the screams of the dying, but Daniel fought on, driven by the knowledge that this could be the final battle. When they reached the peak of Black Mountain, the remaining soldiers formed a protective circle around Daniel as he prepared to cast the spell. The skies darkened, and the ground trembled beneath their feet as the ritual began. Daniel's voice echoed across the battlefield as he chanted the ancient incantations, his words carrying a power that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the earth. As the spell reached its climax, Daniel felt the pull of the sacrifice, the life force of every warrior who had ever fought in the war, all converging on him, their souls merging into one. The pain was excruciating, a searing agony that tore through his body and mind, but he did not falter. He could feel the spirits of the fallen warriors surrounding him, their presence a comforting warmth in the midst of the torment. In his mind's eye, he saw their faces, men and women from across the ages, each one a hero in their own right, who had given everything for the cause of humanity. They looked to him now, their eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude, as if they understood the sacrifice that was being made. Finally, with a final, agonized scream, Daniel completed the spell. The air around him crackled with energy as the spirits of the warriors were bound to the earth, their combined power creating a barrier that sealed the demons away. The ground beneath Black Mountain split open, a chasm of darkness that swallowed the demon legion whole, dragging them back to the infernal realm from which they had come. And then, there was silence. The battlefield fell still as the surviving humans looked around in disbelief. The demons were gone, the war was over. But the cost had been great, too great, perhaps. Daniel stood alone on the peak of Black Mountain, the ancient book clutched in his hands. His body was battered and broken, his soul shattered by the magnitude of the sacrifice he had made. As he gazed out over the battlefield, Daniel knew that he would never be the same. The spirits of the fallen warriors, now bound to the earth, would watch over the land, ensuring that the demons would never return. But at what price? The weight of their sacrifice bore down on him, a burden that he would carry for the rest of his days. The survivors began the long process of rebuilding their world, but the memory of the eternal war would never fade. Monuments were erected in honor of the fallen, and Daniel's name was etched into the annals of history as the hero who had ended the war. But Daniel himself withdrew from the world, unable to bear the weight of his actions. He wandered the land, a solitary figure haunted by the ghosts of the past. In time, the world began to heal. The scars of the war remained, but life slowly returned to the land. The skies cleared, and the sun once again shone down on the fields where once only blood had flowed. The human race, battered but unbroken, moved forward, rebuilding their civilization from the ashes, but Daniel never found peace. The spirits of the fallen warriors, now guardians of the realm, whispered to him in his dreams, reminding him of the price that had been paid. He knew that he had done what was necessary, that the sacrifice had been worth it, but the knowledge brought him no comfort. The weight of the souls bound to the earth was a constant presence, a reminder of the cost of victory. Years passed, and Daniel became a legend, a figure shrouded in mystery and myth. Some said he had ascended to the heavens, becoming a godlike being who watched over the world from afar. Others claimed that he had disappeared into the wilderness, living out his days in solitude, far from the eyes of men, but the truth was far more simple, and far more tragic. Daniel had given everything for the cause of peace, but in doing so, he had lost himself. The man who had once been a warrior, a hero, was now a shadow of his former self, wandering the world in search of something he could never find. In the end, Daniel returned to the ruins of the ancient city where he had found the book. The library, now overgrown with vines and moss, was a quiet place, untouched by the passage of time. He entered the building, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls, and placed the ancient tome back on the shelf where he had found it. As he did, a sense of calm washed over him, a feeling that he had not known in many years. The spirits of the fallen warriors, now at rest, no longer haunted his dreams. The weight of the sacrifice, though still present, seemed lighter somehow, as if the burden had been lifted, if only slightly. With a final, weary sigh, Daniel sat down in the center of the library, his back against the cold stone wall. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. The world outside would continue to turn, the people would rebuild and move on, but Daniel had done his part. The war was over, the demons were sealed away, and the future of humanity was secure. As the last light of day filtered through the cracked windows of the library, Daniel's breathing slowed, and his heart grew still. The warrior who had ended the eternal war was gone, his spirit finally at rest. The library, once a place of knowledge and power, was now a tomb, the final resting place of a hero who had given everything for the sake of peace, and so, the story of Daniel, the last warrior of the eternal war, came to an end. His name would be remembered for generations, his sacrifice honored by those who lived in the world he had saved. But the man himself, the one who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, was at last free from the burden of war. In the quiet darkness of the ancient library, Daniel found the peace that had eluded him for so long, and with it, the eternal rest that he had earned.